Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. Welcome to the Kaiser Report. Another demonic armed robber went on a looting spree in Jefferson County, Alabama this week. No, this time it wasn't actually Jamie Dimon. And we know it was not him because this robber actually jumped off a cliff. What is remorse or fear or drove him to jump off the cliff? Who knows? But obviously has something that Jamie Dimon doesn't have, and those are human emotions. And he was also arrested. Stacey Herbert?
Max, yes, this is the headline. Armed robber in demonic mask shoots customer and flees store with money, then falls off cliff and breaks his back before having leg amputated. A man shot a customer who followed him in Jefferson County, Alabama. Police deputies said, "I would like to think that maybe he jumped off that cliff because of remorse, but I can't give him that much credit." So two things, Max. First of all, on my handy little phone here, the autocorrect, when I write Jamie Dimon, it writes Jamie Demon. It rewrites it to Demon. So I was thinking maybe that's what happened with this headline here about the demonic mask. Maybe he had a Jamie Dimon mask and was just looting. Or maybe it was Jamie Dimon.
Well, so he performed a robbery, and then he escaped, he broke his leg, and then it was amputated.
That's correct.
So the analogy to the bankers on Wall Street or the City of London would be that they are stealing money from folks, and we would want them to jump off a building, break their leg, and be amputated.
Well, Jefferson County, Alabama is bankrupt because of Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan selling them interest rate swaps on their sewage system that ended up costing them like many times over what the cost of the sewage system was. So perhaps even this man robbed some sort of shop because he was broke because he had to pay the sewage fee to Jamie Dimon. But the other thing is the police deputy, he would never talk like that. Did he say this referring to Jamie Dimon when Jamie Dimon bankrupted the entire county by tens of millions of dollars? I would like to think that maybe he jumped off that cliff because of remorse, but I can't give him that much credit. Why didn't he tell Jamie Dimon, jump?
Yeah, well, America is jumping off the fiscal cliff coming up at the end of the year. So we're going to have 300 million people jumping off the fiscal cliff, break their leg, and then have their legs amputated.
Well, here, in the UK, they have a dead cat bounce.
Yeah, well, growth like that in the UK here that they reported, not very intriguing, is it? Because you strip out the one time for the Olympics and the comparison with the Queen's Jubilee. They renamed this Uncle Ben's Tower to the Victoria Tower or something. They renamed all the major monuments. But this is all very anemic. It's not really growing much at all. The Tories are engaging in a bit of weenie waving, suggesting that, hey, we're great. We've engineered some kind of GDP out of the double-dip recession, but in fact, it's slow to sclerotic at best.
Max, first of all, it's the Queen Elizabeth Tower, like the present Queen.
What did I say? Queen Latifah? This is the Queen Latifah Tower. This is to bring in the punters. Come to the Queen Latifah Tower, and you can get all that rapping good time here in London, baby.
So we've been talking about bankers jumping off cliffs or being pushed, perhaps. Who knows? But here's an image from Occupy Goldman Sachs. Some people are occupying the space outside of Lloyd Blankfein's house. I guess they're waiting for him to do some of that dead cat bounce there.
Well, Lloyd Blankfein, that's right. They're like back in the 30s. People would gather down on Wall Street and waiting for bankers to jump out the window and splat on the pavement. Now people are waiting underneath Lloyd Blankfein's window in New York City, waiting for him to jump out the window, having a crisis of consciousness. I'm ready to meet my maker. Blah! And then, of course, before he can hit the ground, his fellow traders at Goldman Sachs have already sold forward his coffin futures short, and by the time he got to the bottom, there wasn't enough room there to land, so he's suspended in perpetual animation for the rest of eternity, otherwise known as purgatory. That's what you deserve!
Or maybe one of, the New York Police Department is financed in part by Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan with that $2 million bonus giving to them during the beginning of the Occupy movement. So I see now that some of the New York Police Department are turning to cannibalism.
Have you seen that story? That's right. The New York City Police Department have turned into cannibalism, so the sweeping zombie apocalypse has hit into the law enforcement agencies in New York City. They're eating people.
So again, going back to this crime committed in Jefferson County, Alabama, not the one that Jamie Dimon committed, but the one that this guy committed and jumped off the cliff. The police deputy said, "I would like to think that maybe he jumped off that cliff because of remorse, but I can't give him that much credit." So let's keep this in mind as we go to the next headline. U.S. sues Bank of America over hustle mortgage fraud. The United States filed a fraud lawsuit against Bank of America Corporation, accusing it of causing taxpayers more than $1 billion of losses by selling thousands of toxic mortgage loans to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. According to a complaint filed in Manhattan federal court, Countrywide in 2007 invented and Bank of America continued a scheme known as the hustle to speed up processing of residential home loans.
Do the hustle. We're back to the 1970s. Da, 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 da. Do the hustle. The Gibbs, was it? What was the name of that movie where John Travolta was walking around Brooklyn with a can of paint in the beginning of it?
Saturday Night Fever?
Oh, yeah, Saturday Night Fever. That was all about the hustle, wasn't it? Well, it's stagflation of the 70s. It's back.
So operating under the motto, loans move forward, never backward, mortgage executives tried to eliminate toll gates designed to ensure that loans were sound and not tainted by fraud, the government said. So this led to a defect rate that approached 40%, roughly 9 times the industry norm, Max. But Countrywide concealed this from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and even awarded bonuses to staff to rebut the problems being found. So you would think this is a criminal case, outright criminal case, where these guys should jump off a friggin' cliff or at least out of their windows onto the streets of New York City. But no, they didn't. They awarded themselves bonuses. And what is the New York Attorney General's office doing? Filing a civil suit.
Yeah, once again, they're fighting a gunfight with a knife. You know, there's some J.P. Morgan bankers up above us in this building, and hopefully one of these days you'll see some of them flying past the window here. Wouldn't that be fantastic? We could quickly make markets in which ones might splat where.
Well, if you see that, then I would say go long the markets, because it means we're ready to start recovering.
Well, look, even Mervyn King, Bank of England chairman here in the UK, said that he expects the UK banks to crash again because of the failure by the government to reform them in any way. All the stories you're talking about here are just a continuation of the fraud that they've been continuing to perpetuate on themselves, Britain and the world. And even Mervyn King is saying, look, he expects another bank crash, another bank crisis. The reason why UK growth is so anemic is because of the obstacle that is the UK banking system. They refuse to allow this economy to grow because they keep stealing the money, they keep committing fraud. And so this is a well-known fact, but nobody's doing anything about it, least of all Osborne and Cameron.
So again, let's go back to the quote from the New York Attorney General, Preet Bharara, and this is him stating why they're civil suing Bank of America. The fraudulent conduct alleged in today's complaint was spectacularly brazen in scope. Countrywide and Bank of America made disastrously bad loans and stuck taxpayers with the bills. And yet they're only filing a civil suit. You know, compare it to this guy who stole 10, 20 bucks worth of stuff in a bankrupt shop in a bankrupt county in Alabama, bankrupted by J.P. Morgan. And he's chased, shot at, jumps off a cliff. You know, where is that sort of action for this bigger crime? This is tens of billions of dollars here.
Well, they've crashed the market, and in the United States they have a bit of a dead cat bounce in the housing market because all these hedge funds, after crashing the market, after packaging fraudulent securities, after bankrupting banks in Europe, they are buying these housing stocks for pennies on the dollar. They're going to be flipping them in 6 months' time, and then we're back to the primary bear trend after they once again extracted a huge amount of wealth from the economy, leaving it for dead.
So to put into context just the disaster that Bank of America is and the billions of dollars they've required in bailouts from the taxpayer and the hundreds of billions that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have required from the U.S. taxpayer thanks to the likes of Countrywide and Bank of America and Merrill Lynch and J.P. Morgan. Since Brian Moynihan's predecessor, Kenneth Lewis, paid $2.5 billion for Countrywide, the Charlotte, North Carolina-based bank has lost nearly $40 billion on mortgage litigation and investor demands to buy back soured loans, Credit Suisse said on October 5th.
No, the money goes into the, look, let me demonstrate the business model of Bank of America, okay? Here's the Bank of America's balance sheet. You got it? Watch this very carefully. Here we go. Oh, look at that. There, it's completely evaporated. Then they say, oh, that's our business model. It's to simply create a phenomenon where you saw money for a fraction of an instant, But then it disappeared. We got the fee, and you, the American public, got nothing in return. Oh, are we going to reform this brazen act of thievery? No, we're not, because we're on the payroll of the charlatans and the sharks and the banksters.
And now most of these bogus, bankrupt mortgage loans at Bank of America are a result of Countrywide. Remember, Countrywide was the biggest subprime lender in America. Angelo Mozillo received a huge payout. He was fined something like $20–30 million, which Bank of America, i.e. the U.S. taxpayer, paid for him. He was never found guilty or even tried, by the way, for any crime.
Let's bring back the Salem witch trials. Okay, you tie a big stone around these guys' neck like Brian Moynihan over there at Bank of America. You throw him into the lake. If he sinks and dies, well, maybe we made a mistake. If he floats back to the top, then drown him.
Well, it's not just limited to America, where we have all of these toxic derivatives and mortgages and loans and all sorts of so-called assets going poof, like the little demonstration you gave for us there. It's also here in the UK. And we're looking at the next setup for the next crime right here in this headline, Max. RBS's Isabel deal rests on mystery AAA counterparty. Read this quote, Max, to understand just the witch language, the speaking in tongues, speaking of Jamie Dimon. Royal Bank of Scotland dealt with the out-of-the-money hedges on its recent commercial property repackaging Isabel Finance No. 1 by bringing in an unidentified AAA counterparty to write swaptions against adverse interest rate moves.
Right, well, that clearly makes no sense. But that's the point of it, though. In other words, you're creating a statement that within the statement itself, it is a duplicitousness personified, within the statement. And therefore, it's a Mobius strip. It's you know what it is? It's like somebody said recently, the banking system is comprised of impossible objects, which is exactly what we're talking about here. That doesn't exist. That's like saying a chimera. That's like saying, well, we sold our house to a family of ghosts, and they didn't pay, but we saw. Read it again. It's total gibberish.
Well, my interpretation of this, Max, is give us your money or you're dead.
Well, plus they said a mysterious AAA counterparty. There are no AAA counterparties anymore.
There's one. The only sterling AAA counterparty, because there are no governments that are AAA, is the Bank of England.
Okay, well then that's not a mystery, number one. Right? Number two, Mervyn King just said the system was going to crash. So is Mervyn King lying through his teeth? He's saying, system's going to crash, we're not going to stimulate anymore anyway, but we're the mystery AAA counterparty in a swapsation, non-existent concatenation of something that we pulled out of Jamie Dimon's Schwing.
Well, according to the article, swaptions are options to activate an interest rate swap at a pre-agreed price and time. And in Isabel, the times are staggered to cover the period when interest rate movements could have the greatest impact on the recovery of the loans.
No, it doesn't exist. You can't have an option on a swap on something that doesn't exist. It's just pure nonsense. And they put this language into the public record to cover their butts instead of just saying, well, I needed a yacht payment, so I robbed some old granny.
Or instead of just falling off a cliff and breaking their leg and having it amputated.
Right, that's what that language kind of says in a roundabout kind of way. Okay, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking to John Logan Jones in Maine, all about lobster economics. Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Time now to go to Maine and speak with John Logan Jones, who is running to be representative for Maine State House in District 112. John, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Thanks for having me on, Max.
All right, John Logan Jones, you're running for Maine State Representative on a platform primarily about civil liberties and economic matters. Now, between Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, these seem to be the two biggest issues for young people and yet are completely absent from the mainstream debate. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for why. I guess people just don't want to talk about it because they have interests at stake if they do. I'm certainly talking about it, and it's resonating with voters, so I'm going to keep talking about it.
Now, a Pew Research poll just out shows that a majority of Americans want the U.S. to stop intervening abroad. That's never going to happen, of course, is it? Is it too late to stop the military-industrial complex?
Well, I'll tell you, that's why I became politically motivated. I served in the Air Force as an intelligence specialist, and after my first deployment overseas, I was wondering, what are we doing here? It was a waste of time, resources, and tragically lives. So, I hope it can be stopped, and I'm running for state office because I think, one way that we might be able to put pressure on the feds to put an end to this war is for states to stand up and take control of their National Guard units and say, you're not going to have our troops. They're for defending our home, and they're supposed to be here for an emergency, not in some far-off land.
So, John, tell us a little bit about Maine, because we hear about Vermont, and they've got a socialist in Vermont, Bernie Sanders, and who's on sometimes the Bill Maher show on HBO, etc. People know that Vermont wants to secede from the nation, and they get a lot of press. We don't hear much about Maine. Tell us about Maine, John Logan Jones.
Well, Maine is a beautiful place. I love it. People here are very friendly, very independent-minded. The history of Maine is one of independent thought. Back during the Civil War, Maine was one of the few states that nullified the Fugitive Slave Acts, telling the federal government that, no, we're not going to capture escaped slaves and return them to the South. So that's a history that I'm very proud of, and I'd like to continue that independent streak as a legislator.
Well, speaking of economic issues, debt, of course, is on everyone's mind all over the country. What's the situation up there in Maine?
Maine does have a debt burden. We have about $1 billion in debt and about $9 billion when you add in the unfunded liabilities. Our state's GDP is about $52 billion a year, so it's not something like California's debt. But the people in Maine are not, from my experience with voters, very much in favor of taking on a whole lot more debt. We look at what's happening internationally and across the United States with debt, and people get that it's not a good thing to borrow all that money, and so they're not really interested. I brought something along with me, Max. It's the I know you and your voters are familiar, your viewers are familiar with this, but it's the black hole of debt, and I'm not interested as a legislator in throwing the future of young Mainers down.
Put it down! Put it down! You're sucking me into the camera! Put that down! Oh!
But, people aren't interested in doing that up here in Maine. Very independent people, very fiscally responsible people. We're very socially liberal, I find, but when it comes to dollars and cents, Mainers are very conservative.
All right, now, John, of course, you mentioned you were in the Air Force. A new Pentagon report says that banks appear to be mis-selling student loans to the troops, even though they have special protections not available to the rest of the population. 41% of troops have student loans. So here let's get into the area of the banks and the banksters and a lot of the problems there as it applies to the military. And seemingly the banks don't mind who they victimize, even the troops. Your thoughts?
Well, you mentioned the special protections, and Congress, I believe, has created special protections for troops that take on debt. I believe there are certain conditions. If you're deployed, you can put your interest payments on hold, that sort of thing. So on one hand, you have the noble intent, as we so often see with government economic policy, of helping the troops. But I think what it actually does is it entices troops to take on debt that they might not otherwise take on. If you don't have to pay for it right now, then it's more of an incentive to take on that debt. So sure, the banks are going to take advantage of any special privileges given to them, and it is a special privilege to loan to people with these special protections, and later on that actually ends up being a reason that I find a lot of troops stay in is they feel like they can't get out of the military. They have a wife and kids, and they might have some debt, and there's not a very strong economy. So a lot of troops end up staying in the military because they don't feel they can get out because their debt is holding them in.
Well, how is that different than a racket?
Well, I guess that it really isn't.
Okay, so as a military man, do you like to see putting soldiers in harm's way as part of a racket to satisfy Wall Street bonuses? Is it worth being killed in Afghanistan to pay Goldman Sachs bonuses?
I wouldn't put it that way. But yeah, there's It's a tough situation over there. There are a lot of troops that supported Ron Paul during the presidential primary here. That the troops are very much aware that these wars are not achieving the goals that the government say they were declared for, or they weren't really declared. So the troops are paying attention, but like I said, economic factors keep them where they're at, and so it's kind of tough for them to speak out. We've seen a huge clampdown under the Obama administration on free speech within the military. Anytime a troop speaks up and speaks their mind and tells the truth about what's happening, we've seen examples of the administration coming down pretty hard on them.
Okay. What about a third party to address these real issues instead of the social issues that keep the population evenly divided into two easily manipulated voting blocks for the two corporate parties? I think you know what I'm getting at here. There's the two major parties seem to be debating and pushing forward a corporate-led agenda, and they seem locked in this duopoly. Is there room for a third party in American politics? We saw a little bit about with Ron Paul. You mentioned Ron Paul. Is there any hope maybe of a really strong third party element emerging in American politics?
Well, I think there's certainly room for a third or fourth party in the United States. Unfortunately, the rules are written such that they keep the third parties out. It's very difficult to get ballot access. There's various ways they keep you out. Right now, I'm really happy right now, this debate cycle, there's been a lot of coverage of the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is a secretive group that decides who gets into the debates, and they set the criteria, and their contracts are often kept secret till after the elections. So as far as there being room, there is. I just don't see the opportunity for, on the national level, a third party to get into the game because the deck is so stacked against them.
All right, John Logan Jones, you were a delegate from Maine to the Republican National Convention in Florida. Tell us what happened.
Well, it was an eye-opening experience, to put it lightly. I went down there as an elected delegate to represent the people of Maine. Maine went strongly for Ron Paul at our state convention. We took all the delegates. We won all the delegates, went down there, and various people in the group were ready to go down there and regardless of the outcome of the convention, support the nominee. But what we saw down there was that there was a script written for this convention. It wasn't a true political convention. They had a desired outcome. They wanted it to go a certain way, and there wasn't any opportunity for input from the delegates on the floor of the convention. Just for aside for the viewers, a point of order is something that's a point of privilege for all delegates to be able to make a point of order any time in a political convention. And there were huge roars of point of order from the crowd that were just completely ignored. So, I'm a Republican candidate. I believe in a lot of what the Republican Party stands for. It was really unfortunate to go down there and see that the National Party was more interested in putting on, this TV show, so to speak, than to actually have a debate about what the party stood for and to allow all the various candidates there to be have their votes counted. So it was unfortunate, but what it really told me was that the change that this country needs isn't coming from the national level, and that's why when I came home, I doubled my efforts and became a candidate for state representative because I know that the state and local offices are where the change needs to come from because the national level politics are too far gone in a lot of ways.
All right, John Logan Jones, I want to digress a little bit and pick your brain on a subject that I'm sure you have some insight to, being up there in Maine. My understanding is that this year's lobster harvest has been enormous, and primarily due to ecological effects. Can you speak on that a little bit? And I want to ask if you see that as a trend continuing in the future, and does the ecology now have a permanent place in factoring in the state's agricultural business, John?
Well, the lobster industry is huge in Maine. And right now, I believe lobster is near all-time lows in terms of prices. And it has actually sparked a little bit of a conversation, a rivalry across the border with Canada. And I'm not a lobsterman, so I can't speak too far into the details, but I know that it's a really important issue. It's a very heavily regulated industry, and if there's going to continue to be these sort of historic price levels, then I wouldn't be surprised to see more policy action at the state level. I'm a free market guy. I like low prices, and if there's a lot of lobster out there, great. I'd like people to be able to eat our Maine lobsters cheap. But yeah, it's an interesting issue. This is all-time lows for lobster prices. It's been a leading indicator when the price of lobster collapses, the stock market has been not too far behind historically.
Well, I can't believe you just said that. That sounds actually like breaking news. You're saying that with every fall in lobster price, it's a leading indicator. You soon see a fall in the Dow Jones. People are looking for what would trigger a fall in the Dow Jones. It could be this lobster harvest and this all-time low price. All right, all-time low for lobster prices. You heard it on the Kaiser Report, direct from Maine. All right, John Logan Jones, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, John Logan Jones. If you're going to send me an email, please do so at kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.